We are surprised that he is talking about laziness. Our next speaker is a technologist, musician, cook, food writer and author of the book Masala Lab. Please welcome Krish Ashok.
So, if you're wondering what this talk is it about cooking? Is it about music? Is it about software? It's about none of those things. It's actually about all three of those things. So, quick introduction. I work at TCS. I head one of the business units at TCS called Digital Workplace, with thousands of people who work for me. I have music that you can listen to on Spotify. I play the violin, cello, and guitar, and produce my own music. There's an album of heavy metal songs in Sanskrit that you can listen to on Spotify. I've written a book on the science of Indian cooking called Masala Lab, which you can pick up. I write on the science of Indian cooking for various magazines. I blog for a fair bit of my life, created internet memes over the years. There's SoundCloud with over 100 songs, and also a companion to the book, Instagram handle called Masala. So obviously, I think after that masterclass in humility and modesty, so the question I get often asked is, how do I find the time? How do I find the time to do all the things that I do? Right? So this talk is fundamentally about answering that question, because in any case, after the talk, I end up getting asked this question anyway. So I thought I might as well save all of you some time and answer the question, how do I find the time? So I hate to break it to you, it's nothing very exciting. It's something that I call strategic laziness. For any of you who observe cats, you would know that they're absolute masters at being strategically lazy. They're not clumsy, they're fantastically agile, but their movements are minimal and they move only when they absolutely need to move. Right? So that's my inspiration, strategic laziness. So I've been in software for 23 years. I've been a musician since I was 7, and I've been cooking for about 2 decades. And I've largely realized, in a sense, that strategic laziness is something that scales across everything we do. So, and I'm going to start with a little bit of a personal story to really make this come alive. When I was 7 years old, my parents bought me a Rubik's Cube. And this was the mid-1980s, for those of you, right? So that's how old I am. And I was 7 years old, I got this Rubik's Cube, and one day my parents came back from work to find that I had solved the Rubik's Cube. Immediately, right, Tamil parents, they're like, oh man, this guy is going to be IIT, let's put him in engineering classes right away, advanced mathematics, calculus right away. And then my father, they said, okay, by the way, how did you solve it? And I told him I changed the stickers around. That's all, right? So just so you know, that's where strategic laziness began. So on that light note, but I want to make a slightly more serious point on the basis of that Rubik's Cube story, which is that there is this notion of what we call inferred spirit, right? So you're supposed to do something, you're supposed to do it the right way. Right? So you're supposed to back in a certain way, you're supposed to draw in a certain way, your handwriting is supposed to be in a certain way. And it's interesting because kids are generally fantastic at inferring spirit. Figuring out, oh, this is what it means, I'm going to do this. This is how it works. Then as you grow older, you lose the ability to infer the spirit of things because you're forever worried about inferring the rules behind things. Right? That's what you're worried about. Right? So that's why children tend to be more creative and so on. But this kind of makes sense because an adult who is good at inferring spirit is called a creative person. An adult who is good at inferring rules is called a criminal. Right? So therefore, there's a very delicate balance that one has to sort of tread when you think about creatively interpreting how you do things and so on. So, but I want to then take another segue into really talking about what I call the jugaad gaze. Right? Every 6 months, some media outlet will come out with a listicle of the greatest examples of jugaad. Right? There'll be these photos and we'll all be wondering at how amazing these people's individual creativity against the lack of resources is, and so on, right? So you see this teacher who sort of put together what looks like a reuse of a cradle to put together something like a tripod, and that guy is basically using 2 sticks to be able to sort fruits by size, and that lady is grinding flour while also working out. Right. Now, each of this is from the top jugaad from the Economic Times, I think of 2020 or something. Right? So, but there's a very interesting thing at play here. Right? While we absolutely celebrate the individual's creativity against all odds, we completely ignore the fact that this is actually a failure of collective creativity beneath it. Right? So, there is no civilized society should make its teachers go through this. Because teaching is just so important, right? Likewise, we should not be having a farming and an agricultural ecosystem where a person simply cannot afford the tools that make him basically productive, right? And the third thing, again, my favorite topic on cooking, I'm pretty certain most people in this room will not be able to tell the difference between a chapati made from freshly ground flour and whatever atta you buy from the store. Right? This is 2022. We should not be expecting that fresh food means that you will literally sort of mill the grain in your home. It's completely unnecessary. Right? It also comes from this fact that most people expecting that food should be cooked in a certain way tend to be people who do not cook, also known as men. Right? So therefore, there is absolutely no reason to be able to, on the one hand, you can celebrate that individual creativity, but at the same time, you need to look at the fact that it's a collective thing. Now, that sort of brings me to my next, right? So 7-year-old Rubik's Cube. So when I was a 23-year-old, I have to kind of talk about how did I get into software. See, for starters, I've been playing the Carnatic violin since I was 7. By the time I was in my 20s, I was a semi-professional Carnatic violinist. And so I had the option to kind of become a full-time musician, if you will. So why did I get into software? Why did I begin my life as somebody in the arts, then kind of get into software? So, in case you're thinking, let me disappoint you, this is not me. This is one of my hobbies is finding ridiculous stock photos and using them in presentations. And I found that this was particularly an exemplary example of a ridiculous stock photo. The kid's expression is clearly because he's debugging CSS. So on that note, so I began in software. In case you're thinking a very noble reason, the dawn of the computer age and the fact that it could make India a superpower in the late 90s and so on. Unfortunately, no, I joined software because it was the most amount of money for the least amount of work. It's easy to laugh, but over time, I started to take this rather seriously, right? So, on the one hand, what is good software? What is good software engineering? I'm sure many of you here would know this already, right? Good software engineering is fundamentally about being as lazy as you possibly can. Because it's about writing as little code as you possibly can in as little time. Hopefully not from a blank canvas. You're just going to copy code from GitHub or Stack Overflow and debug that, and you're probably going to automate the testing. You're going to use as many frameworks as possible. That is good software engineering. So, in a sense, the philosophy of strategic laziness has always been around in software for the longest time. And in a sense, a lot of my ideas of applying that elsewhere really comes from my introduction to this in software. By the time I was about 10 years in software, I kind of realized that you could be extraordinarily smart at spending as little time as possible so that you can free up your time to do other creative things. So, in a sense, as somebody asked, the most amount of hard work I do is in making sure I have enough leisure time. So that's my definition of hard work. Hard work should be the work that you do to create time to do things that you absolutely like. Right? So, in a sense, so this is how I begin. So, therefore, if you think about software itself, right, there's a free Harvard course that all of you can take up. It's called computational thinking. We all know computers are absolutely dumb, and you have to really break a complex problem into small, repeatable parts that a computer can execute. Right? And there are many patterns. Right? So there are search patterns, there are sort patterns, there are UI patterns, there are many individual elements that kind of go into really essentially thinking about a large complex problem in a computational way. Right? So let me say this up, right? I want to extend that to say that there's something called computational creativity. Meaning that just like the computer, I am not very smart. Right? Therefore, for me to be creative, I need to use small little Lego bricks of creativity that I will use the help of technology, wherever possible, and apply the same principles that a software engineer applies in being creative in whatever I want to do, and thus be able to do more. Right? So computational creativity. So let me kind of begin with a very interesting story. So again, this is allegedly a quote from Michelangelo, although in reality it's actually a quote from a novel written by someone about Michelangelo. So but it kind of sounds like something he might say. So when Michelangelo was asked, how does he create something like the David? Right? I mean, it's just astonishing. If you actually see, if you get a chance to see it in Florence, it will just blow your mind away. And by the way, it's very large. It's like some 15 feet tall. It's not small, right? And he says, for me, when I look at a piece of marble, all I do is remove every bit of the marble that is not David. And then I'm left with David. Right? Sounds amazing. Sounds like the kind of thing someone with the kind of talent of a Michelangelo or Kriti Monga, who just spoke before me, will be able to say, right? Unfortunately, I'm neither Kriti Monga nor Michelangelo, right? So what I can aspire to is watch a YouTube video how to make a David out of Lego bricks. And by the way, you'll find hundreds of videos teaching you how to make a David, reasonably full-size David statue. That's not me, it's somebody else. But in general, the point I'm trying to make is that for you to be truly liberated from one very specific idea of what creativity is, right? And I agree, you have to work with your hands, that's equally important. But in equal measure, right, it's also important for designers and creative people to be able to think computationally, to be able to think about creativity in Lego bricks, right? Now, I want to take some practical examples. So this is a piece of music that I worked on many years ago. So this was when I was not really good at the guitar, but just listen to it for a bit. I'm not sure it's playing. Let's see. That was a song that I did with a friend of mine almost 7 years ago or so, and it's sort of like our adaptation of a 1950s Tamil film song and so on. And anyone listening to it is like, oh, that's some really sweet acoustic guitar work. How did you do all of that slide? And, you're not even a guitarist, you only play the violin and so on. And my answer to that is, So my answer to that is essentially that let me wake you all of you up to how modern day music is produced. I played that guitar riff roughly about 50 times, and I sucked in each and every one of those times. But in each one of those 50 times, I could find a small segment either at the beginning, middle, or the end where it seemed reasonably okay. So I cut, copy, paste, edited, fixed the timing, and then looped it through the entire track, and that's how that song was made, right? So, I know it kind of sounds silly, but this is how all music is produced today. If you listen to anything in the studio, live music is an entirely different thing. So, if you're really serious about the craft of music, you need to be listening to live music. But there are things that you can do with the digital tools you have that you simply cannot do live. So, I think it's important to sort of appreciate it, right? So, this, by the way, music is no different from how software engineers approach the fact that today, for some reason, somewhere, if your internet service provider blocked GitHub and Stack Overflow, all software engineering would come to a screeching halt. And nobody knows how to write code from scratch, and that's perfectly fine, because I don't want people writing code from scratch. If you get an engineer who says, I'm going to do this search algorithm all by myself, you must fire him right away. Please take the guy who's willing to reuse someone else's code, build on top of that. Right? So in a sense, I think this is very this is how I do it. Right? So I can apply the same thing to cooking. Right? So this is a chutney recipe generator that I made, that I scripted on Google Sheets, which by the way you can use. So in a sense that when I think about cooking, software and design, you guys are already thinking along the lines of reusable components, you're thinking about GitHub, you're thinking about Dribble, you're thinking about all of these other things that go into making design easier for the next generation. Cooking, not so. And it's basically because a bunch of men have decided that everything has to be cooked from scratch, nothing should be stored in the fridge, microwave must not be used, pressure cooker must be used, and people should personally harvest everything fresh and cook and so on. So the general idea of a chutney is that why not build a meta model that says a chutney is essentially cooked ingredients, raw ingredients, nutty stuff, herbs, salt, acid, sweetness, and tempering, and then allow people to pick based on what they have in their fridge, or if you're feeling lucky, hit the random button and it will generate a chutney recipe for you. So I did the same thing in a visual style as well. For people who don't like looking at Excel sheets. So this is a visual version of the same chutney generator. And obviously the blender is an Asura, because it's pretty obvious that Asuras probably have more interesting food. Devas probably ate bland food and so on. So this is the chutney recipe generator. Now again, likewise, this is a dal recipe generator. Right? So why do I need 10,000 recipes of dal if all I know is that these are all the legumes? This is how long I need to soak, this is how long I need to pressure cook, and then I have fats, I have spices, I have base flavoring, spice powders, and there you go. By the way, if you're feeling lazy, go for this random recipe. If you're like, maybe on a date and you're cooking for someone else, go for the special dal recipe. So in a sense, I think the logic behind a lot of this fundamentally is the fact that there's no reason to think about why cooking cannot also be broken down into smaller reusable bits. And this is not just in the knowledge sense, right? It's incredible how in India we believe that, anything that's old food is not good, you must not use anything in the freezer. All biological activity stops at minus 15 Celsius. So if you have a refrigerator, you can literally make your life significantly easier. And so on. So this is, for example, a cheat sheet on how to cook eggs, right? And by the way, you can't read what the hen is saying. It's saying that if milk is vegetarian, so are my eggs. So that's what the hen is saying. So if you have doubts about that, you can discuss after the talk. And this is an algorithm on how to think about coffee. Right? So my point here, and this again is an algorithm on how to make Indo-Chinese hakka noodle fried rice kind of food. So you prep veggies, you velvet the meat, you make the sauce. These are the components of the sauce. You prep the carbs, and then you stir fry, right? So that's basically a general purpose algorithm for all Indo-Chinese food, if you will. Now, my second sort of point about this entire idea of strategic laziness is the realization in my 20 years of working and doing all of this, is the fact that while the Lego bricks themselves may be different, it's not fair to say that the logic is the same, whether be it cooking or software, but the way you think about how you assemble them, it kind of scales across disciplines, right? So I'll give you an example. I essentially, as one does, wrote a Python script to go crawl every major Indian food blog and downloaded about 50,000 recipes, and then generated a word cloud of the most popular sort of food blogs in India on what were they generally thinking about, right? And you can kind of see these patterns. So Indian healthy recipes from Andhra, you can see very chicken heavy, Tarla vegetarian, so it's very paneer heavy, Kadama cooks, Tamil, so you can see chicken, mutton, fish, and so on, right? So a lot of my knowledge about cooking not just comes from just reading recipe books and watching people, but also in a sense using modern tools like saying, hey, I can't possibly read through 50,000 recipes, why don't I let Python read through that and kind of give me insights about all this. One small little side segue. This is a lovely bit of visualization that I did not do. India in Excels, Ashish is a fantastic guy. He puts out these fantastic visualizations of data from India. But my one complaint about this visualization is the fact that Most engineers will say, India is only 29% vegetarian. Most designers will say, most of India seems to be green. So there's something wrong with that. Clearly 27% Uttarakhand cannot be green. So I kind of fixed the visualization. So this is actually the correct version of the visualization of how vegetarian India is. In case you're wondering, did I use Python and GeoPandas and Plotly Express to do this? No, I use Adobe Photoshop and the Paint Bucket tool. Always remember, changing stickers on Rubik's Cube occasionally is good strategy. So you don't always have to do this. So on another lighter note, I looked at about 4,000 recipes on Tarla Dalal to try and find out how are people thinking about pressure cooking in India. So the pressure cooking essentially is the fact that if you ask anybody how many whistles, they will say 3. But did you know that the instruction manual always says that you should always place 1 whistle, lower the temperature, and then wait for time, right? So I plotted every instance of number of whistles and found that it's a normal distribution centered around 3. Which is that there's 1 whistle, 2 whistles, 3 whistles, and then there are things with 9 whistles. So that's what I like it. So kind of get toward the end, right? Most creativity for me is craft masquerading as art. You can't truly be an artist without actually putting in the 10,000 hours, without really going through that craft. And again, particularly in cooking, right? My grandmother was a natural cook. No, she was not. She was forced to sit in the kitchen and slave with little choice in the matter for 10 to 1,000 hours, and she was really, really good at it. So in a sense, I think a lot of my goal on cooking was to say, can I bring the same approach that, say, a GitHub or something brings to software in the context of cooking? Can I capture the meta-knowledge rather than recipes, which is just single instances of somebody's knowledge, right? So, in that sense, this is the final slide. Rather than go through 20,000 different chicken recipes, we put together something called the Great Indian Chicken Algorithm, no relation to the Malayalam film. This was done in collaboration with a lovely friend of mine, a chef by the name of Sadaf Hussain. So essentially the idea is that these are the different parts of the chicken. That's how long it takes to cook. And that's how you skin it, that's how you brine it. These are the different ways in which you can marinate it. If you want to make a dry dish versus a basic fry or a batter fry, that's how you do it. And here's a universal gravy algorithm, right? So there is a tadka, base gravy, chicken, spices, garnish. You can do makhani, you can do white, you can do salan. OTM, by the way, stands for onion, tomato, masala, which is 90% of all North Indian gravies in India, right? Rasala and chatina, and then of course variations of tadka and so on. So, on that note, I just want to close by saying that making the hard easier for consumers is something that you guys do, right? But in equal measure, I want you to focus on making easier for the next generation. So in the sense that you have to make it easy for the next generation of makers, and that's essentially where Lego bricking creativity really comes from. Right? It's good to learn from software, it's good to learn from design, but it applies anywhere. Right? So the other thing, obviously, is that it's good to open source with Lego blocks. Right? So that's I think is a very crucial thing. Last but not the least, rearranging Rubik Cube stickers is occasional. Okay, and that is, by the way, a omelette shaped like SpongeBob SquarePants generated by the AI DALL-E. So on that note, thank you.
Asks Krish, how do you account for all the randomness of bugs that might get lost in following all the cheat sheets? Is it too structured and you might lose out the serendipity of random bugs and random...
So I'll give you a software answer. There's no such thing as true randomness, by the way. All randomness is in some sense unrandom at some level. But I think we overvalue that randomness. There is enough randomness in you being able to say, you know what, I'm going to take these things and mix them together in a unique way. Right? And for a beginner cook, I think having bigger Lego blocks is a good thing. Just like how kids use the bigger Duplo Lego blocks and then graduate to the smaller ones. I think start with bigger Lego blocks and then decrease the size. There's enough randomness for you to be able to exploit.
You've seen all these cooking robots over. You put in all the ingredients, you punch. I think many men will become cooks once they come into
No, there will be cooks in there. Actually, it's the robot will be doing the...
Won't the fridge automatically order the dal from the grocery?
Yeah, so that's actually quite interesting. So most appliances, cooking appliances tend to be designed by men. for women, and they're very terribly designed for the most part. Like impossible to clean, right? And we often appliance manufacturers tend to solve the wrong problem. They're not actually solving the 90% of the cooking time is cleaning and prepping. But they'll solve the cooking problem. That's literally takes only 10 minutes. Because if you cook for more than 10 minutes, you're probably burning it.
Okay. We have a question from G. Raja. It's a personal question for you. If you had continued on the music path, do you think you'd be one of India's leading musicians?
I don't think so. So classical music again, as with most art in India, is very insular. It's you got to know someone, you got to be part of a family, and in that sense, relative to that, I think software has largely been more meritocratic in that sense, right? Meaning that has a wider range of tolerance for competence than music does. Music is it's a very, very long tail, but if you're not the top artist, it's very hard to make a living out of doing music.
So that's right for a nice Game of Thrones or a House of Cards kind of show.
Absolutely.
Indian classical music
Absolutely.
scene, all the intrigue that it involves.
Oh yes.
Okay. All right, Krish Ashok, thank you.